covered in our last session. What we have covered in our last session. We have worked on use effect. Use effect can be used multiple ways. Use effect can be used for detecting unload, detecting on, unload, and detecting uh, specific state variable changes, or we can detect multiple state variable changes, or we can detect any state variable changes. And based on that, if you wanted to execute something, yes, we can execute. Now, this use effect is a hook which is part of a functional component. The equivalent of this use effect is called life cycle methods. That means a set of methods are there which is part of class component. And today, what we are going to do, we are going to work on class components. I think there is some technical issue. I'm unable to open once. We got four submissions. Let me check one. Let us check Ankit Mishra. So, Database name is VR. Let's say triple eight nine. VR. So I'm creating a table, database named VR. I'm importing it. This one module should be inside. So I'm installing the packages of server, and here I have already copy pasted the packages of client. Start, start. Successfully connected to database. Basically, you are using user effect only for getting the values from local storage. Okay, good. Uh, and let us move to subject today. We are going to work on class components, and we are going to work on life cycle methods. We are going to work on life cycle. The question-oriented program. An improved version of that is object-oriented programming, which increases reusability, scalability, and flexibility. In object-oriented programming, there are so many concepts other like inheritance. Calculation, abstraction, composition, classes. Multiple concepts are there. Out of that, class is something which we have uh, used, which we have learned, and class component is nothing but improved version of this class. That means you create a class, and this class at the JS, then this becomes a class component. Now let me show you. Just open the previous work which we have created. This is the one which we have worked in our last session. Adding the functional component which we have learned. Today we are going to work on a class component. We are going to create something similar. So let me change a bit so you can understand it. On this, let's see, Some background color I have given, which I should see that. This is a functional component. What I display. So according to the content which is displaying like this. So this is functional component which we have created. Now I want to create something similar. Now I'm coming with that. Great, that means it will show it in the next one. Now I wanted to create something similar, which is this time I wanted to create class component. So I'm clicking on this. It says CC. This means class component. Counter. How to create a class component? I'll say RCC React class component. I'll say enter. Now see if you observe here, this counter is actually a class, but which extends the component. So basically, if I go inside this component, uh, the import component from React. So basically, React is a JavaScript library developed by Facebook. Developed by, and in this React JavaScript library, class called component. There is a class called component. Now, class component means any class which is child of this component class is considered class component. Now, see, this CC counter extends component. That means the CC counter is the child of this component, and basically, this component is actually abstract class. This component is actually abstract class. That means these components create certain rules. The child classes must follow. One out of such examples is render. Render function must be there. That is a rule. If render function is not there, it will not work. Now see here, I'll just delete it. It should not work. It won't work basically because render must be there. Now I'll come here and .js. Now I will try to include this functional class component. I'll say show as class component. You see, I'll say right click export. See, it is showing error if you observe it. It's showing error. See, CC counter no render method found in the returned component instance. You may have forgotten to define it. So render method is mandatory because that is an abstract thing. Now I come to counter, then say undo. So render method is coming now. Now what I can see is that class counter. Now this is a class component counter. Now here of it I wanted to implement it and decrement it. That I wanted to implement. That I wanted to try. Yesterday session we have tried it using using functional component, using use state, using use effect. Today we are going to work on the class component. We are going to use state. We are going to use the lifecycle methods instead of components. So now it is like this. Yesterday we have used it in functional component. Today we are going to use it in class component. In functional component, we have used a use state variable. Equivalent of use state is this dot state. Variable we have to use it. And here we have used a use effect to detect component load, unload, state variable changes, and all those things. Here we are going to use lifecycle methods. Lifecycle methods means collection of methods are there, which will be using it according to our requirement. First of all, let me create the UI first. What I will do, I will say uh, same UI. I am going to create it here also. Paste it. And the class component doesn't support the hooks. Class component doesn't support hooks. Now here I will say class component. I'm just going to delete this. Class component doesn't support hooks. Hooks is something which was introduced after functional component. Now the basic stuff I have created. Now being here, the counter line 11. This will be this is the class component. Yes, Monica, do you have any question? Monica, do you have any question? Now I have created this. This is class component which I wanted to give different color to it. So I'm coming back to app.css. I'm creating. You're seeing is a class component. Now what I wanted to do, I wanted to create a state variable. A state variable. On click of that increment button, I wanted to change it. Decrement button, I wanted to change it. If it is normal, now this is functional component. Now I wanted to implement the same functionality. Right here, buttons are there. Here also buttons are there. But this is a state variable. Use state we have used it. But the use state is a hook which is supported in functional components, and use state or any hooks is not supported in the class components. Equivalents are there. Now if I wanted to create a state variable, I have to create a constructor first, and set that I have to create a state variable. Now what I will do, I'm in class component. I will type something called RCON or unconst. So it will be creating the class constructor. Now see, it has created the class constructor which has props super and this dot state. Now this is like a state variable. But in the class component, the state variable is referred as this dot state, and that is actually an object. Now here I am creating counter, comma, store. These properties inside this, and what I wanted to do, on click of the increment button, I wanted to change it. So how do I change it? And so on click of this increment, first of all, let me show it here. Say this dot state dot counter. This will show 0. Here also it is showing 0. Right? And what I wanted to do, on click of this increment button, I wanted to change it. Change it on increment button and say this dot set state. There is a method called set state. In that set state, I have to change it. How do I change it? Say class bracket which is referring to an object. I'll say count dot state dot count plus one. Whatever the value is there counter, for that we are adding plus one. That we are assigning it to counter. Now if it works fine, it should see it is incorrect. Behavior is same. Here what we are doing, here also we are doing the same thing. But here we are using functional component and use effect. Here we are using class component and this dot state object. Now what we have done, we have created the constructor. Inside the constructor, we have created the office keys, and what we do, we set this dot state dot counter, and we have done it. This dot counter is this dot state dot counter plus one. Now I want to implement it. Here also I will do the same thing. This dot set state object counter. What I wanted to do, this dot state counter. Whatever the counter value is there, I will. Now observe here, it should change accordingly. This is increment. This is the same behavior. This is related to counter. Now I wanted increment or decrement score also. That also I can do. Anyway, I have created one more key in state, which is score. So display score here. Default which is 0. Score. How this dot score is an object here. Also I can see this on click of this increment I want to decrement. On click of this decrement I want to decrement it. So how do I do that? Here I'll say this dot set state say score dot state dot score plus one. In this case, here state dot score minus one in this case. Implementing it. If you see here, what we are doing here and what we are doing here, both are same, but what is the difference between these two? This is functional component, this is class component. This is we have used use effect. Here we have used state variable. Here we have used use state. We have used discard state. And here we can detect the component load, component unload. Even here also we can detect component load and component unload also. We call it as life cycle methods. Let us see how do we do that. Here I can write the uh, component component did mount. Component did mount is a function which will be called automatically whenever the component loads. Not loaded. That means class component loaded. We can detect the unload also. Component load. Component will unload, it is going to unload it. The console log. Class component unloaded. We have worked on it. Now let us see here. Now even here also I will link with the ternary operator. Nav.js. Instead of directly showing the CC counter, I'll say show counter to then show CC counter. CC counter is show counter is false. Nothing shows. Otherwise it shows CC counter. Something like here I have to use question mark. Either it is self-closing or this closing, both are same. Now observe here. I'm refreshing it. Both are not showing. Now I'll say the show hide counter process. And both are going and both are coming. Now what I'll do, I'll just say show hide counter. Now see what happens. Component loaded is also calling, functional component loaded is also calling. If I click on this unload, class component unloaded is also calling, functional component. Yes. So the equivalent of use effect in class component is there is a method called component did mount, which is for detecting the loading, and component will unmount, which is useful for detecting the unloading in class components. Understood so far? Yes, state and set state acts as a state variables in class components. Yes. How to detect loading and unloading components in class component methods. Component did mount is useful for detecting the loading. Component will unmount is useful to detect the unloading. Question so far? Covered two methods which are part of three methods actually. We have covered three methods which are part of lifecycle methods. One is component did mount, another is component will unmount, and there is render. Render is also part of lifecycle methods. Questions anyone has so far? Now, what I'm going to do, I'm going to try what happens if a specific state variable changes. What happens if a specific state variable changes? There is a method called should update. Should component update is a method will be there. This method will be called whenever any state variable changes. But we should return either true or false. We should return either true or false. Return either true or false. Now, just to show you an example, now here I say console log should component update. This method will be called automatically whenever any state variable changes. Now we have actually two state variables here. One is counter and another is core. If any one is changing, that will be called observe. See, component update. Even here also inside component. So any state variable changes if any state variable changes, should component update will be called. And here we have to return basically true or false. If we return true, render will be called. If we return false, render will not be called. That means what? Now see here, I am saying false here. False, and now observe here. I am clicking on it. Even if I click now see here. Even if I click now, observe here, it is not changing now. Even if I click here also, it is not changing. Why it is not changing? Because whenever we change the state variable, should component update function will be called. In should component update, if we return true, render will be called. If render is called, the component will be updated or reloaded. The render is not called, the component will not be updated. Now because we are returning, render is not called. Just observe now. In console log, CC loaded I have written, CC unloaded I have written, and I'm writing component update, and then now I'm going to write it render. Now observe here, I'm just CC unloaded. Now I'm clicking on it. See here, CC loaded is called, and render CC loaded is also called, and the render is also called. And whenever I implement it, should component update is calling, but we said false, that's why render is not calling. If render is not called, the UI will not be updated. Now if I say here, it happens. So here if I click on increment, now see, whenever I click on this button, should component update is calling, there we are returning true, so render is calling. There we are returning true, so render is calling. Understanding what we are doing? So basically, whenever you change the state variable, should component update will be called. In should component update, we have to return true or false. If we return true, render function will be called. Render will update the UI. If you return false, you should component update. Render will not be called, so UI will not be updated. That is how the mechanism is this. So we have worked on the multiple life cycle methods of component, class component, which is a component git mount, component will unmount, should component update, and render. 4 life cycle methods we have called, we have worked on it, and we can also get parameters also. We can also get the parameters. Now, any state variable changes, this should component update will be called. For few state variable changes, you want the component to be updated. for few state variable changes, the component you don't want it to update it, then you can get the parameters here. Now I just say props. So let me check the, um, next props in next state are the two parameters we'll be getting. So next name you can give. Print this console log. We'll be getting that state object as the parameter. So increment. So here we are getting state object as the parameter. Now you can see counter is coming. Now if I click on score, that score is also coming. Now based on this, if we wanted to implement any functionality, whether to update it or not, yes, you can do that. That means what? Now whenever counter value changes, I wanted to update the component. Whenever score state variable changes, I don't want it to update the component. So I can implement like this. Now what I will do, if what I am doing, this dot state dot counter, I am accessing the counter is equal to next state. Next state. If both counter values are same, why I am comparing like this? This dot state dot counter is actually the state variable which is not updated yet. We have, whenever I click on the button, we are clicking this latest state object. This latest state object will have the updated value. This is not updated. So both are there. I'll say both are same. I'll say return. That means state variable will not be updated. Variable is not changing. That means I don't want it to update the UI. So I don't want it to come. To call render. So what I am doing here, click on the button, which button, for example, any button, increment or decrement, increment score or decrement score. Basically, we are changing the state variable. Whenever we change the state variable, should component update is calling. There, that new state object with updated value, we are getting it as a parameter, and that update, that new state value which we are getting it as a parameter, I'm comparing with the old value. This dot state dot counter will be having the old value, is having the new value which is updated. If both are same, I don't want it to call the render, so UI will not be updated. Otherwise, I am saying update. Now, actually happening, I am clicking on increment. The render is calling, UI is updating because every time we are assigning the new value. But observe here what I am going to do. I am going to create one more button. To create one more button. This I'll say assign and and I'll say I'm assigning that it should be assigning 10. So on click of that assign 10, sending 10 to counter. Now see what happens. Now if I click on assign 10, yes, we have assigned 10, render is calling. But observe now, again I am clicking on it. If you observe here, render is not calling again. If you observe here, see, it is not calling again. The reason is because we are assigning the same value. The same value there, the same value is there, we are saying return false. We are doing it. Now see here, I am incrementing it new value that UI is calling, render is calling. If I assign 10, now render is called because 14 to 10 we have assigned a new value. Again, if I assign 10, it is not calling because we have assigned the same value. So we can control when to call the render, when not to call the render using the should component. We are doing, first of all, those days are gone where we have to work on class component. But still, in interviews, people may ask you, that's why we are covering. Speaking, the should component update is not at all required also because now right now we have created the component which is child of component. There is one more component is there called pure component. What? Pure component. Now let us make this as a child of pure component. Now this component is the child of pure component. Now we don't need this should component update now. The pure component will check the state variable. If any new state variable assigns, it will automatically call the render function, otherwise it will not. Now observe here, keep on clicking, render is calling, but observe I'm clicking on assign 10, render called because I assign the value from 5 to 10. Again I'm clicking on assign 10, now see render is not calling. Whenever I click on this, see render is calling. And the value is changing. Every time the value is changing. But if I assign 10, value is changing from 17 to 10, render is calling. But again, if I am click on assigning 10 because the value is same, render is not calling. That is the advantage of using pure component, which is the child of one of the parts of one of the classes of React. In interviews also, they may ask you what is a pure components. Then we can tell pure component is a class which is part of React, which can be used as a parent class to create a class component. The advantage of using a pure component as a parent class is whenever any state variable changes, should component update the function will be called. There we have to detect, we have to control whether render should be called or not. But when it comes to pure component, if the state variable changes, uh, automatically the render function will be called. Otherwise, if the state variable value remains same, render function will not be called. That is what the advantage is of pure component. What we are doing, again I'm telling you, we are not going to work on this class components. Doesn't mean you should not work. Because in interviews, if they ask you, you'll be able to tell. It is simple. Of course, it will be simple if you work it multiple times. So we are creating a class named CC counter, and if that is the child of either component or pure component, that becomes component. If this is not child of component or pure component, this is not a component. But if it is child of component or pure component, this is the child. This is called as component. And because it is component, it supports constructor, it supports the component did mount lifecycle method, which is useful for detecting the component loaded. It supports component will unmount the lifecycle method. It supports component which detects component unload. Should component update will be useful whenever any state variable changes, and render will be called whenever any state variable changes, and should component returns true. And Component did mount, component will unmount, component update, render. These are all these things we are replacing with the use effect in functional component and this use state we are using sets we are using this constant. This is the latest. This is the old. This improved version of this is this. Which is easy? Functional component is easy or class component is easy? Which is easy? Which is easy? Class component is easy or functional component is easy? Functional component is easy. Why functional component is easy? Because functional component is improvised and simplified. Functional component is improvised and simplified class component. They have taken class component and they have improvised it and simplified it. That is what actually functional component. That is the reason you will feel functional component is easy, and that is the reason we have covered on functional component first than class component. And we use functional component more than class component because before almost 2.5 years, 3 years back, now this functional component has been introduced. Before that, class component was used. Understood? Even though we are going to use functional component, but I want you to try to create a simple thing like this, a simple counter. We just try to create it, and what we have done in functional component, try to implement it in the class component also. At least some basic idea, at least once, twice you practice it, that will be good for you because join in the company and if they give you the project, if the project is developing the if they are developing the project for past 4 5 years, then you may you may face a class component because 4 5 years back there are no functional components, only class components are there. So you may require to use class components also. It is good to learn that, which I want you to try to get something similar like this. Okay. That is the task. And in interviews, people may ask you the difference between class component. Sorry, people may ask you the difference between class component and functional component. They may ask you what is a pure component and what is component. That also you should be able to tell. I want you to create what I have created a container counters. You can create similar. I'm taking,